If that scenario happens, then absolutely we will be at war in Europe. Uh, I think, what he has said, and if you read into what he said, the Baltic states are next. He wants to restore the Soviet Union. So the Baltic states and potentially, going south into Romania and Bulgaria. But it would seem to me the Baltic states, Latvia, Latvia are the next there. Now, these are all NATO members. So the minute that he steps into them, if it hasn't created Article 5 by then anyway, it will do. So that is what people need to understand. Putin sat in Kyiv is basically the Third World War.
So Hamish, in the revelations, these FBI warrants around the doppelganger group of websites the Russians were forming for their disinformation wars, there was a revelation from the Putin's office, the presidential office, that they were looking to provoke nuclear psychosis as a strategy, as part of their influence operations. And it seems like that's happening, isn't it? Because we see Putin increasingly rattling the nuclear saber. He's done it for 2 years, but he seems to be doing it increasingly in the last few weeks. Is this a real threat or a sign of desperation?
Well, the Russians published a video earlier on this week detailing their major nuclear exercise this year, their strategic weapon usage, and really very much aimed at the West, as flexing their nuclear muscles again. I think, as we've discussed many times since the beginning of this war, 24th of February 2022, Putin and his gangsters have been threatening the West and the UK in particular virtually every day with nuclear attack. So to put on show their command and control network and capability was not unexpected. But actually, if you look at it in any detail, it's ancient. I mean, it is absolutely virtually from the Stone Age. Some of the vehicles that they're using or they're showing as their commanders in there, some of the computers would make the initial Amstrad computer that Lord Sugar produced 40 or 50 years ago look modern. So, I think, this is a real own goal. Whether these are ancient photographs and videos, I don't know. But the equipment that they're showing is of an age that is way past. And if that's the sort of stuff they're using, electronically, one can imagine that the West would very easily be able to interdict it and prevent it being used. And I think the other thing on this, they're talking about strategic attack. They're talking about Armageddon. Now, there is nobody in the world, including Putin, who believes that we are going to get into a strategic nuclear conflict, because that's the end of everything, and that's absolutely not what Putin's trying to achieve. They then look at the tactical nuclear warfare. This is a bit of an anathema, but these are smaller nuclear missiles or bombs dropped from jets, which have a range of about 400 miles and have a yield of about 10 kilotons, still a very big bang. And again, they are pretty much unusable because a lot of the Russian systems are very ancient. So without boring people with the details, as soon as they switch these trucks or missiles on, they produce such a large electronic signature that the US and British and NATO intelligence virtually pick it up before the thing even moves. So, and they would be very easy to take out with cruise missiles, Storm Shadow, that sort of thing. So that is pretty unusable. So I think the main message is, and hopefully this message has been understood in parliaments and governments, particularly in Europe, and hopefully in London as well, that this is bluff and bluster. Putin is just doing it to frighten timid leaders in the West, and they should ignore it because it's just not going to happen. And when Putin puts on display what he's saying, his great nuclear forces, and you can very, very, very clearly see this is equipment from the 80s, even before that, it would be very easy electronically to stop it going anywhere. before anything was done. So hopefully people will see that it is, for what it is, complete bluff and bluster. I think he is sort of clinging on. We know the Russian economy. Some people are saying that interest rates in Russia are at plus of 20%. Inflation is drifting up to about 40%. 40% of the output of Russia has been spent on the military. That's unsustainable. And when you look at manpower, even conservative estimates are suggesting the Russians have lost 600,000 dead. They lost about 13,000 dead in Afghanistan in the 80s, and that was enough for the mothers of Russia to force the Kremlin to withdraw. So, when you look at that, and when you look at, he's having to rely on Kim Jong-un, the tyrant in North Korea, to provide him with missiles and ammunition, and we'll come back to Kim Jong-un. He's having to rely on the mullahs, the ayatollahs in Tehran for missiles and ammunition. I think it shows a perilous state, but he knows that with elections coming up in the US and with Britain and others reining back on support, if he can convince Sir Keir Starmer and others to hold back, then he's got a chance. He knows if he can hold on for perhaps another 12 months, then the West will lose interest, and America may well have gone elsewhere, as it were. So it's throwing the nuclear card in. He knows works every time, because our politicians are exactly that. Mostly politicians. You look at the politicians in the UK; they have no real understanding of geopolitics and strategic issues and defence, and it works. He frightens them, and that's really what people like me, who are expert in this, are trying to do, to convince our leaders that this is bluff and bluster, and they should crack on and really put the nail in Putin's coffin while we have an opportunity to do so.
So, Hamish, I want to talk about the revelations that North Korean troops have been sent to fight on the Russian front lines against Ukraine, I think mainly in the Kursk area. Now, reports say there are about 12,000 troops come from North Korea. Many of those won't be front line, and maybe it estimates only about 3,000 frontline troops. Meanwhile, Russia is losing through casualties and death 1,500 troops a day. So there's only about 2 or 3 days worth of troops at current attrition rate. So what do you think's really going on? What's the significance of this strange alliance between North Korea and Russia?
Well, I think it's significant on a whole host of fronts. I agree that Putin is finding it difficult to get conscripts. He knows that the next big move he will have to get conscripts from the sort of elite and rich of Moscow and St. Petersburg. And he knows if he has to conscript them, that is probably his last throw of the dice, because it was their mothers who made the Kremlin withdraw from Afghanistan in the 80s. So that's the final throw. But to go to North Korea, the Russian and Putin's attitude is, what we in the UK would say was extreme right wing. It's anti-LGBT. It's very sort of very focused on the elite. And Putin has always regarded people in the east of Russia and the east of the world as being sort of, lesser humans. So, to go to the North Koreans and ask for 12,000 troops is an extreme thing, and a recognition that the West, the free world, must understand that he is absolutely struggling. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, which is probably more worrying for global security, is what is North Korea getting in return? Well, on Monday, they fired an intercontinental ballistic missile that travelled 7,000 kilometres. That brings the US mainland well in range. Now, they haven't been able to do that. 12 months ago, they fired a missile that travelled 1,000 kilometres. So how on earth they've gone in 12 months from 1,000 to 7,000 is unbelievable. The Iranians are trying to do the same, and they have been struggling for years and years. So we know that the North Koreans have a nuclear warhead. and now they have an intercontinental ballistic missile. The other element to this ballistic missile is the re-entry of a missile into the Earth's atmosphere is a hugely challenging task, which until earlier this week we believed the North Koreans hadn't cracked. They've cracked that. If they've cracked that, they've probably also cracked the nuclear warhead on this missile. So what it shows, it must be that Russia has swapped nuclear know-how and technology for artillery shells, missiles, and now 12,000 troops. And the other thing about these troops, it is a massive escalation. This is North Korea entering the war. If this doesn't give carte blanche for the UK and the US to allow Ukraine to fire missiles into Russia, I don't know what does. But very significant bit of information came out of the Pentagon on Monday of this week, which sort of went unnoticed. And I think we can really hammer this home, on this piece, that the Pentagon said those North Korean soldiers could now be attacked with American military capability. Therefore, those North Korean soldiers in Kursk can be attacked with US ATACMS, with Storm Shadow and others. And so I think when you look at it in the round, this is probably a strategic error by Putin. But our leaders must understand that. They must recognize it and they must act demonstratively. This is their opportunity, really, to push home and make sure that Ukraine prevails.
Hamish, I just want to know why there is so much caution among Ukraine's allies. We had a debate all over the summer about Ukraine's ability to use Western-supplied long-range missiles to strike targets, supplied bases and aircraft launch pads deep in Russia, and they were refused permission, even though they asked for it. More recently, Poland has offered to shoot down Russian drones if they stray into Polish airspace, and yet they seem to have been refused permission to do that. What is this tentativeness and caution all about?
Well, I think it's a number of things. When we look at the US, obviously they've got their election coming up next week, and in that sort of difficult area, nobody wants to make any demonstrative decisions. I think when we look at our own country, we can't now say that the UK is still, in the first fleshes of its new government. I am concerned that some of the new team in Westminster or Whitehall are very inexperienced. There are, although on the defence side, the new minister seems like a good guy, but none of the people advising him have any military background or grand strategic political background. So I think it's they're being overcautious because they don't really understand the environment they're in. And when we look at the mainland European countries, again, I think there is a nervousness and a fear to go further because a lot of these leaders are, Putin has got to them and is getting to them and is worrying them. And what they don't seem to realise is actually, in warfare, if an opportunity arises, you really have to grab it and make the most of it and reinforce success, not reinforce failure. And a number of opportunities have been presented recently to reinforce success, like the Kursk maneuver by the Ukraine forces. And the West haven't really got behind it. So it is a real challenge because as we go into winter, we have the potential of Trump becoming president. Life for Ukraine and Europe is going to get a lot worse. And Putin is gauging if he can hang on for 12 months, he is going. If we're having this conversation in 12 months' time and we're in the same position and various things like maybe Trump is president and a few other bits and pieces, we will be in a very much worse position. So, the West has got probably 6 months to enable Ukraine to prevail. And if they're bold, that will happen. But if they're weak, Putin will just exploit it.
So, Hamish, the subject on all our minds, looming early next week, the US elections. Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. Who do you think will win, and what do you think the impact of that will be?
Well, it's very difficult to gauge exactly what is going to happen, because Trump has said a lot of things, and I think we all know that Trump changes his mind, as regularly as the wind changes direction. So perhaps what he said yesterday is different to what he's saying today, is different probably to what he'll say tomorrow. But I suppose we have to look at two extremes. At the left-hand side, if you were, as the least extreme, nothing will happen at all, and things will crack on as they are. At the right hand, the extreme of what Putin said, he'll end the war in 24 hours by negotiating direct with Putin. Now, I think if Trump went to Putin and said, right, we'll stop now and we'll have the borders as they are today, no doubt Putin would accept that, without even a thought, as long as he gets Kursk back. So, but that would be completely unacceptable to the Ukrainians and to the West. So, it's the worst thing that a Trump administration will produce is uncertainty, and the uncertainty that the US will keep providing the bulk of the military hardware that Ukraine needs, the bulk of the military intelligence that Ukraine needs. So that by that uncertainty will create opportunities for Trump, for Putin, no doubt as well. And I think that is the issue. And of course, it's going to be a couple of months before the new administration take up power in January 2025. And in those 2 months, virtually nothing is going to happen, which again will give Putin opportunities. So I think that is the big concern, that we don't know which particular Trump will turn up. If he is elected in January, there is going to be a 2-month interregnum that is going to create opportunity for Putin. And, the uncertainty is the last thing you need in warfare, which again is why Britain and the European NATO countries must be prepared to take up the slack and be more demonstrative and not just rely on Uncle Sam to sort this out. I think, Trump's line is, it's about time you in Europe started doing the heavy lifting. You're much closer to it. And I think that's what people perhaps in the UK don't realise. The US is another 4,000 miles, to our west. And we are very much closer to Ukraine and closer to Putin's threat. Putin is going to fire, if he does fire a nuclear missile, it's coming to London long before it's going to Washington, and we need to understand that.
Hamish, you've worked the British Army and NATO, and you understand how complicated, how much training needs to go on for armies of different countries to cooperate and work together. So with these 10,000 whatever North Korean troops, they don't speak Russian. They will have presumably different armaments, supply chains. And so say they sent these troops to either Kursk or Crimea. The experience of North Koreans is mainly defensive, isn't it? The North Korean-South Korean border for whatever is 80 years has been a defensive position. What do you think these North Korean troops would actually do, and how will they integrate with their Russian allies?
Well, it's completely incongruous that these guys are being sent to the front line. They don't speak the language. Maybe one or two might speak Russian. Certainly, none of the Russians will speak North Korean. So communications is going to be a nightmare. Now, some people are saying these are elite special forces, North Korean soldiers. I mean, that is just bonkers, and nothing. They're not Delta Force, they're not SAS in any way at all. From what we've seen of them, they seem to be very basic, what we'd call just basic infantry soldiers. So when you put all that together, they will be able to do little else than enter the meat grinder, like the other conscripts, Russian conscripts who have a few weeks training. And with training, what it means is you can do very basic things. The Russian conscripts are taught how to fire a rifle. A lot of them don't even know how to clean the ruddy thing. So it quickly fails. They know how to sit in a trench, and they know how to get out of a trench and march forward, which is why they're being slaughtered in their thousands every day. And that to me is going to be the same with the North Koreans. But they're not even going to be understand when their Russian commander tells them to get out of the trench and go forward. They're almost going to be poked forward like cattle moving towards a cattle grid sort of thing. So I think it is callous, and for these young guys who are being plucked out of their homes in North Korea, sent thousands of miles to the West to fight a war for somebody they probably have no idea who is callous in the extreme. I don't think they'll be able to do anything but the very basics, and it strikes me they're just there to plug the gap and feed the meat grinder to keep the war grinding on for the next 6 months or so. So when Putin knows that if Trump's in power in the States, and if the West starts to lose interest and doesn't want to pay for this anymore, then Putin will prevail. And unfortunately, lots of people do not realise that Putin's ambitions go way beyond Ukraine, and he ain't going to stop there. So yeah, these North Koreans, that's why the quid pro quo of nuclear technology is that's why Kim Jong-un is prepared to sacrifice 12,000 soldiers. He has a standing army of over 1 million. There is no way he would send his elite soldiers to die in the Donbass. Like most autocratic leaders, he's far too selfish to do that. But he's quite happy to trade a couple of thousand soldiers for the technology for his intercontinental ballistic missiles and his nuclear warheads, which he then sees. That makes him a big guy. He's now a big guy in the Far East. He's got a nuclear capability. People will listen to the little fat chap who we see on the telly far too regularly. But as far as his soldiers, I don't think he cares. Nor does Putin care for casualties or collateral damage. Unfortunately, these autocratic tyrants really come from the same mold, sadly, and the sooner we break that mold, the better.
Hamish, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. If, God forbid, Putin were to take Ukraine, and there he is now sitting in the center of a captured Kiev, how much further would he go?
Well, if that scenario happens, then absolutely we will be at war in Europe. I think, what he has said, and if you read into what he said, the Baltic states are next. He wants to restore the Soviet Union. So the Baltic states and potentially, going south into Romania and Bulgaria. But it would seem to me the Baltic states, Latvia, Latvia are the next there. Now, these are all NATO members. So the minute that he steps into them, if it hasn't created Article 5 by then anyway, it will do. So that is what people need to understand. Putin sat in Kyiv is basically the Third World War.
Hamish, always illuminating to talk to you. Your analysis is always true and spot on. So look forward to talking to you again on the other side after the US elections. Well, thank you for watching this interview. If you like what we're doing, you can help us out because we don't have Kremlin gold pouring into our coffers. We have no oligarchs like Musk or Murdoch backing us. We thrive only through your support and donations. So you can help us by subscribing to our regular monthly print edition, Byline Times, which covers a lot of these issues. And you can also subscribe to Byline TV, where there's lots of extra content, films, documentaries, and stuff you can't get for free. Consider that, and otherwise, we look forward to talking to you again very, very soon. See you on the other side.